I'm a 35-year-old guy who signs his emails, kind regards, but still double knots his sneakers. I run a small analytics firm that grew out of a crappy side hustle I used to do at midnight in a studio apartment with a door that barely shut. I've got a sensible condo, a coffee machine that probably costs more than my first car, and a calendar that's so color-coded it looks like a bag of Skittles exploded. On paper, I'm boring successful, quarterly reports, client calls, the occasional friendly golf game where I'm mostly there for the free sandwiches. People who meet me now think I'm calm. If I seem calm, it's because I finally paid a bill that started running the day I was born. My parents told me I owed them everything. I don't mean in the sentimental way people say. I owe my mom the world. I mean in itemized debt. Food. Clothes. School supplies. The roof over your head. Every time they said that phrase, the roof over your head, they'd tilt their chins toward the ceiling like they'd personally invented shingles. It wasn't love that kept me fed, it was a running tab. It wasn't a home, it was a loner life. Dad kept a notebook. He called it the household ledger. Like we lived in a Victorian boarding house instead of a split level with beige carpet and a smell of old coffee. It sat on top of the fridge with the phone book and a jar of pennies. He'd take it down after dinner, click his pen, and narrate like a sports commentator. Milk $3.79. Bread $2.29. Gas for the school run, call it $4. You think those lights pay for themselves? Then he'd look at me. Say thank you? Thank you? I'd say, and he'd smirk like he'd caught me stealing gratitude back from him. My mom specialized in sighs. Not angry ones, not loud ones, thin, surgical sighs that slid under your ribs. She'd fold laundry with the TV murmuring and say, I just hope you understand what we give up for you. Not everyone would. I learned early that I love you was followed by but, and the but would carry a price tag. Hugs came with subtle checks. Did I ask for too much? Did I cost too much? Did I use too much hot water? When I was 8, I took 2 cookies from the jar during a commercial break. Dad paused his show and asked how many I took. I told the truth. He nodded and went to the ledger. Pack of cookies $3.99, divided by 12. He muttered, pen scratching. 66.5 cents each. 2 cookies, $1.33. He wrote. $1.33, J. It was the first time I saw my initial in the book. It felt like a sentence carved in stone. Why are you writing my name? I asked. Mom was at the sink, rinsing a glass in long, slow circles. So you don't forget, Dad said, not looking up. We keep track so you'll pay it back when you're old enough. You don't expect us to just cover everything, do you? What does that teach you? What does it teach me? I wanted to ask. It taught me to memorize the heat cycle of the dryer so I could pull my clothes early and save 20 cents. It taught me to swallow tiny hungers so they wouldn't show up on a page. At 10, I tried to opt out of the ledger by being smaller than my hunger. I wrapped half my sandwich in plastic to bring back home, like that would balance the books. Mom found it, unwrapped, soggy, in my backpack. She called it wasteful and made me write. I am not wasteful. 20 times, then added $2 to the ledger for the wasted bread and cheese. Consequences, she said, smile soft but eyes flat. People talk about love languages. In our house, the love language was interest rates. Birthdays were weird. You blow out 7 candles and then get handed an envelope with a gift card, and a typed note that said, Remember, your party costs around $40. When I asked for a sleepover once, Dad made a speech about utilities, bathroom cleaning supplies, and wear and tear on the carpets. It was like negotiating a corporate merger to let my friend bring a sleeping bag. Some scenes blur with time, some are crisp forever. The time I got straight A's in 9th grade and Dad said, Good. Colleges like discipline. Maybe you'll get a scholarship and stop draining us. The time Mom hugged me after I made the basketball team and whispered, Don't get injured. We don't have money for extra doctor's visits. The way the word extra had sharp corners. The way it landed on the ledger even before a sprained ankle could. I learned to calculate in my head. 5 minutes extra in the shower equals 15 cents. Turn off the light when you leave the room, that's 2 cents saved. Skip the field trip because $10. For a museum you'll forget in a week. Wasn't worth the fight. I started taking jobs as soon as I could, mowing lawns, walking a neighbor's dog, shelving books at the library. I kept my cash in a shoebox labeled phone, because Dad once said he charged me rent when I started using more minutes. It would be easy to turn this into a neat villain story with booming voices and thrown plates. It wasn't that. It was smaller, pettier, relentless. It was Mom standing in a grocery store aisle comparing 2 cans of tomatoes like we were defusing a bomb, then giving me a look that said, "See? This is for you." It was Dad saying, "You think your friends' parents are as generous as we are? You think they don't keep track?" It was receiving birthday cards from relatives with cash inside, only to be told, "We'll hold this for you," and then never seeing it again. Later, if I asked, Mom would sigh. "It went toward your shoes in September. You're welcome." When people ask why I left home the day after graduation, I want to say, because the meter never stops. I packed my life into a couple of bags while the house slept. The ledger was on top of the fridge, like always. I stood there for a second, hand hovering. I didn't take it. I didn't need to. It lived in my head, every cramped number, every underline drawn with the ruler Dad kept in the side pocket for neatness. Before I get ahead of myself, I should say this: I'm not writing to dredge up sympathy. I'm writing because I did something very specific, very deliberate, and people will have opinions. That's fine. I had opinions my whole childhood, and none of them mattered when the pen scratched across the paper and my initial turned into a tally. If you grew up like me, maybe what I did will feel like letting go of a breath you didn't realize you were holding. The oppressive part was the script. You could set your watch by it. Dad, I paid for that jacket. You know what that cost? Me. Yes. Dad. What do you say? Me. Thank you. Dad. And someday you'll pay it back. Me. Yes. Mom sigh. We just hope you remember who was there for you. Dad loved the phrase. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. He said it while ladling spaghetti, like he was feeding a stray. If I pushed back, even a little, a teenager's dumb edge, he'd go quiet and then say, like a judge passing sentence, "Add it to the ledger." The ledger wasn't just money, it was attitude charges, interest on eye rolls, surcharges for not smiling quickly enough. When I got my first B on a math test, he flipped the paper over and wrote, $10, in red pen. Penalty for slacking, he said, laughing, but his eyes checked the top of the fridge. Later that night, he actually wrote it into the book. I saw my initial and a short note. Lack of effort 10. He had a parenthesis system, like he was proud of himself for organizing my worth. And beneath all of it, the constant reminder that I was expensive. Even compliments were wrapped in invoices. You're getting tall, new pants again. Maybe stop eating so much pasta. Those shoes look sharp. Too bad they were $50. You're lucky your father works so hard. Their love was a receipt tape that never tore off. If you've ever tried to sleep under those conditions, you know it's like trying to nap inside a bank vault. Everything echoes, and there's always a clock. By 16, my world had shrunk to school, work, and quiet. Quiet kept the meter from spinning too fast. I'd learned to cook cheap, fix things with duct tape, and patch the elbows of my hoodie so I could stretch one more winter out of it. I didn't go to prom. The ticket was $40 and the dress shoes would have been used against me in closing arguments for the next 2 years. I told people I thought prom was dumb. The truth was simpler. I was tired of owing for joy. On my 17th birthday, my parents took me to a chain restaurant where the walls were cluttered with fake vintage signs. Mom told the waiter it was my birthday, the staff came to sing, and I wanted to sink into the red vinyl seat. When the bill came, Dad studied it like a contract. $22 for that burger? He said, tapping the paper. He glanced at me. Happy birthday. Add 22 to the ledger. He smiled. We'll call the song free. That night I stared at my ceiling and tried to imagine a version of the universe where I love you wasn't itemized. I couldn't. So I made a different promise. One day, I would settle the account the way they taught me accounts are settled. Exact, emotionless, final. Not to win. Not to get applause. Just so I could walk out of the bank vault and feel air that didn't taste like copper. If this sounds cold, good. Cold is what was taught. Precision is what was rewarded. I learned to live by numbers because numbers couldn't be guilted. Numbers couldn't sigh. Numbers didn't tilt their chins at the ceiling and remind you about the roof. Numbers were a language even my parents respected. So I grew fluent. And eventually, I wrote my own ledger. I left the morning after graduation while the neighborhood sprinklers were still ticking their metronome against the sidewalks. No grand speech, no slammed doors. I put my duffel in the trunk of my beater sedan and set the spare key on the kitchen counter like a piece of evidence. The ledger was on top of the fridge, a little curl at the corner where someone had spilled coffee. For a second, I thought about taking it. Not to throw it away, just to stop it from being there. But I didn't need paper to remember. Numbers were already carved into me. The drive out felt like a long exhale. I'd saved $1,142. 63 in my shoebox, counted so many times the bills felt thin. I found a room in a basement on Craigslist. The landlord was a retired plumber who wore white socks without shoes and said, "No parties," like it was a legal clause. The room came with a futon that had a suspicious dip in the middle and a milk crate that doubled as a nightstand and, when flipped, a desk. "Utilities included," he said, then added, "as long as you're not a hot shower guy." I promised I wasn't. I'd been trained. My first job was dishes at a diner that smelled like syrup and bleach. The manager, Greta, had a voice like a fax machine. "Plates go through twice," she barked my first night. "If I see lipstick on a coffee cup, you're redoing the rack." My hands pruned until my fingerprints felt erased. There was a rhythm to it though: spray, stack, slide, steam, clatter, and for a few hours a night, the only sound in my head was water. I liked that. I liked clocking out with my shirt damp and knowing the number on the stub was mine. During the day, I enrolled at community college for an associate's in business with a lot of stats. Numbers again. Cheap, close, transferable. I took the bus, sat near the back, kept my backpack between my feet like a tether. In class, I fell in love with spreadsheets. Conditional formatting felt like magic. Pivot tables were tiny machines you could build with your hands. I started making lists again, but they were mine: hours worked, tips, bus fares, grocery totals. I wrote my own ledger, but I named the second column peace, and I measured it in minutes of sleep, in showers taken without someone standing in the hall knocking. The calls started the second week I was gone. Sunday evening. Always the same ringtone, that default chime that made my stomach drop. "Mom. Hey honey, we were wondering if you got settled. We miss you. It's so quiet here. You know the water bill came and it's lower, which is good for us, but it made me think about how much we did when you were here. What are you studying again?" "Me. Statistics. Accounting next semester." "Mom. Useful. You'll appreciate money more. Your dad says he's proud. Also, we had to replace the washing machine, years of heavy use, you know? Don't worry about it now. Just, remember. Dad in the background. Ask him about rent. He's using somebody else's roof now. Maybe he understands." "Mom. We're not asking for anything. Just, you know, we did a lot." "Me. I know. I knew. That was the point. I learned to keep the calls short. When I didn't answer, Dad left voicemails that sounded like invoices read aloud. We got your W-2 from last year. You should have told us you made that much at the library. You could have started paying us back. Don't be ungrateful. At the diner, I got good enough that Greta let me come in early to prep. I'd slice lemons and reload the napkin holders while the cooks told stories about people they'd been before. One had been a Marine. One had sold knives door to door. I was just a kid who knew how to make a waterfall chart. "You're quiet," the Marine said once, flipping a pancake with a wrist flick that made it land perfect. "Quiet makes you harder to hit." He said it like advice, not strategy. I picked up a second job stocking shelves at a big box store from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. The fluorescent lights there were their own kind of weather. My body found a new schedule: sleep in 2 chunks, classes in the afternoon, work, an hour of YouTube tutorials where some cheerful stranger in a crisp polo shirt explained nested if statements. I'd practice by building silly sheets: how many plates I'd washed that night, what % were chipped, how many more plates before I could afford a coffee maker that didn't sputter like an old man. One night I posted a flyer on the community board. I can organize your books. Small businesses. Excel. Honest rates. I got one call, a florist whose inventory lived in her head and on sticky notes. Her shop smelled like green stems and old water. I spent 2 Saturdays building her a sheet with tabs for weddings, funerals, walk-ins, wastage. How much? She asked, eyes on my hands like I might magic a bill out of them. I said, 50. She counted out the cash, then handed me a daisy. For your desk, she said. I put the daisy in an old jam jar on my milk crate and wrote, First Client, in my ledger. Under. Peace, I wrote. 2 hours where no one sighed at me. Holidays were a negotiation I lost by not showing up. Thanksgiving I took a double. Family is important, Mom said on the phone, voice sugared and sharp. I hope you don't become one of those people who forgets where he came from. I remember exactly, I said, then felt bad, then felt angry for feeling bad. Christmas, I went home, because I still had a key in my pocket, and some part of me wanted to prove I could survive it. The house smelled the same. The ledger was there. Mom hugged me and held me long enough that I almost melted. Dad handed me an envelope across the table after lasagna. Inside was a single sheet. Statement of support, preliminary. It listed estimates, food, clothing, utilities, activities. At the bottom. Total to date, $47,380. He bolded it. This is just to keep track, he said, hands up. So there are no surprises when you're ready. Mom, it's not about money. It's about recognition. Me. I recognize it. Dad. Good. Maybe start with $100 a month. Show good faith. I nodded like I was taking notes in class. That night I lay awake in my old room with its peeling poster and did math on the ceiling. $100 times 12 times however many years it would take to bleed out a number that size. When I left the next morning, Mom tucked a Tupperware of cookies into my bag and said, Don't forget us. I ate a cookie in the car and tasted flour and salt and something like a dare. There were setbacks. My car died on a February morning so cold the air felt granular. I learned buses don't care if you're late, you wait your turn. I spilled hot coffee on my lap during a midnight stock shift and laughed because it hurt and because the manager said, No spills on the floor. I stayed with a guy named Luis for 3 months after the landlord decided to renovate my basement. Luis played FIFA at a volume that suggested the TV owed him something. He was also the person who showed me how to run a side script to combine messy CSVs. He called it the robot that eats bad lists. He didn't want money for the lesson. Buy me tacos sometime, he said. The next week I bought him tacos. There were wins. I bought a winter coat with a zipper that didn't stick. I switched to a prepaid phone plan and watched my balance like a hawk without a handler. I built a template for the diner's schedule as a favor for Greta, and she started calling me college, like it was my name. I took an adjunct's suggestion and signed up for an online course in Python because, if you want to get paid for this brain, you need to speak computer the way you speak ledger. My parents floated in and out of this new life like radio static you can't fully tune out. Sometimes Mom called and just breathed for a second before she spoke. I saw a boy at the store who looked like you when you were little. He was picking out cereal with his mom. Made me think about all those mornings. Sometimes Dad sent texts that were all numbers. Here's the price of gas now. If you think you're doing it without us, think again. Once, he drove to the diner. He sat at the counter and ordered coffee and watched me carry a rack of plates like I was performing for him. When he left, he put a 5 on the saucer and said, Don't forget to tip your parents. Greta watched him go and said, Family? Technically, I said. She grunted. People who love you don't make you pay admission. I wasn't noble about any of it. I fantasized about calling them and saying exactly the right devastating thing that would make them see. I wrote drafts in my head, perfect speeches that ended with silence on the other end of the line, the clean kind, not the loaded kind. Then the bus would come or the pan would boil, or the lecture would start, and my life would move forward without a speech. At 21, I transferred to a state school with a scholarship that felt like a hand on my back instead of a hand in my pocket. I moved into a 600-square-foot studio with thin walls and a view of a brick wall. The previous tenant left a whiteboard. I hung it by the door. On the left side I wrote, rent, utilities, groceries, bus, school. On the right side I wrote, time. I started treating hours like currency. An hour of dishwashing equals 3 meals if I cook cheap. An hour tutoring stats equals an extra gigabyte of data. An hour building a template for a local handyman's invoices equals 2 hours of silence where no one calls me ungrateful. I dated a little. That's relevant only because the first girl who spent the night pointed at the whiteboard and laughed. You're like one of those productivity guys, I said automatically. It keeps me from owing anyone. She didn't know what I meant. We lasted 6 weeks, not because of the board, but because I flinched when she said, I got this one. At a coffee shop. My body thought it was a trap. Independence sounds like a flag, a clean snap of fabric. In practice, it was 1,000 tiny decisions that added up to a feeling like standing outside at night and realizing you can see or breathe because you're the one breathing. It was buying the cheapest rice in bulk and learning to make it 3 different ways so it didn't taste like punishment. It was taking a call from Mom and saying, I have to go, and then actually going. It was, slowly, the background hum in my head shifting from oh to build. The ledger at home was still there. I saw it on my last visit in the corner of my eye, the way you see a shadow on a wall and know it's a tree. I didn't touch it. I had started something else, a folder on my laptop called Baseline. In it, I saved articles about average food costs by year, public data on utility rates, estimates for clothing expenses. It wasn't revenge yet. It was curiosity. It was the part of me that needed a number to look at instead of a feeling. At the bottom of the whiteboard, small, I wrote a sentence. One day, a clean line. I didn't circle it, didn't highlight it. I just left it there, a ghost of a plan, while I did the next right small thing. By the time I turned 25, the background hum in my head wasn't just about survival anymore. It was starting to sound like strategy. I had a steady job in data analysis at a mid-sized logistics firm. Nothing glamorous. I spent most of my days staring at spreadsheets full of shipping times and fuel costs. But after years of diner grease and midnight stock rooms, it felt like sitting in a climate-controlled spaceship. I wore button-downs that didn't come from the clearance rack, and my boss introduced me to clients with a nod like I actually mattered. My apartment was still small, but it was mine. No roommates, no knocks on the door asking when I'd be moving out. I bought a second-hand couch off Craigslist that smelled faintly of pine cleaner, and when I sat on it, I sometimes caught myself thinking, I paid for this with numbers. That sentence was strangely soothing. My parents, meanwhile, had not changed their script. The calls came like clockwork. Mom would open with something soft. How's my baby boy? Then pivot, without fail, into, we just hope you don't forget all we've done. Dad was more direct. You've got a job now, right? Time to start showing appreciation. One night he called while I was finishing dinner, microwaved curry and rice, and went straight to the point. Dad, you're in your mid-20s. I was already paying rent to my parents at your age. Me, I already pay rent. Dad, not to us. To strangers. That doesn't count. Me, it counts to my landlord. Dad, don't be smart. You still haven't settled your debt here. Debt. Always that word. Like love was a credit line and I'd gone delinquent. That night, after hanging up, I opened the Baseline folder I'd been quietly growing for years. I added a new sheet called Child Expenses Est. Across the top, I typed categories: housing, food, utilities, clothing, medical, education, miscellaneous. I filled in averages I'd pulled from government statistics and consumer price indexes. For the years 1990 to 2008, my childhood and teen years, I plugged in numbers, adjusted for inflation. The total stared back at me, rough but real. $201,732. 84. I sat back and laughed. Not because it was funny, because the number was both enormous and smaller than I expected. Smaller than the emotional weight I'd carried. My entire existence, reduced to a spreadsheet cell. For the first time, I thought, maybe I can pay this. Not out of love. Out of precision. Out of spite so exact it became almost mathematical. But I didn't move on it yet. Not then. Instead, I focused on building. I worked overtime, picked up freelance gigs, small businesses that needed inventory systems, mom-and-pop shops who still tracked sales on paper. I charged modestly, but steadily, and word spread. Call Jason, he'll organize your numbers. Eventually, I had enough work to start considering incorporation. I registered an LLC. That moment, signing a line that meant I was my own boss, at least partially, felt like cutting one of the thinner strings that had always tied me back home. When I visited my parents for my sister's graduation, the ledger was still there. Top of the fridge, same spot, like a shrine. Dad caught me looking at it and smirked. Still keeping track. You'll thank me someday. I'm sure I will, I said, voice flat. He pulled it down, flipped to a page. Look here, 1998. New sneakers. $75. Remember those? You begged for them. I remember, I said. My stomach tightened like I was 16 again, standing in a store aisle asking for something and already knowing the cost would be thrown in my face later. You wore them out in 6 months. Terrible investment. He laughed, closed the book, set it back like it was holy scripture. I drove home that night with my hands gripping the wheel too tight. By then, I had a steady income, a modest savings account, even a retirement plan. And still, one glance at a yellowing ledger page could shrink me back into that cornered kid. That was when the idea stopped being abstract. It crystallized. I wouldn't just calculate. I would pay. Exactly. Not a penny more. The next year, I doubled down on the plan. I poured hours into side work, scaling my analytics gigs into a proper business. Nights blurred into mornings. Coffee cups stacked on my counter like bricks. But the more tired I got, the clearer the goal became. $201,732. 84. The total. The debt. Every time my parents called, every sigh, every guilt trip, I pictured that number like a lighthouse. Mom, we just hope you remember who fed you. Me. I remember. Dad, don't think you can walk away scot-free. Me. I won't. They thought they were tightening the leash. Really, they were walking themselves into a trap they built years ago. One night, I stayed up past 2 a.m., running the sheet again, making sure every line item was right. Rent estimates from 1990s real estate data. Average grocery costs per household, adjusted for inflation. Even utilities. I cross-checked against receipts I'd found in old boxes. Yes, they had kept those, too, because of course they had. Each confirmation made the total sharper, undeniable. $201,732. 84, that was it. The sum of my childhood. I decided I wouldn't send a dime until I could do it in one clean transfer. Not installments. Not piecemeal. A lump sum, final, irrevocable. Like slamming a gavel. So I kept building. My firm grew, word of mouth carrying me farther than I expected. At 29, I signed my first big client, a mid-tier retailer drowning in messy data. That contract alone covered nearly a quarter of the target number. My savings climbed. My parents' calls grew sharper. Dad, we hear you've got a company now. Time to honor your obligations. Me. I will. Mom. Don't wait too long. Life is short. Me. I know. They had no idea how literal I was being. By 32 I had it. In an account, liquid, ready? $201,732.84. Exact. I stared at the number on my screen for a long time. It didn't feel heavy. It felt precise. Clean. But I didn't send it yet. I wanted the timing right. I wanted the gesture to land. The real revenge wasn't just the money. It was the silence that would follow. I started drafting the note in my head. Short. Brutal. Surgical. Just 3 words. Debt repaid. Jason. The day was coming. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what would come after. By 33, my business wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. I had 5 employees, a handful of contractors, and an office that wasn't a corner of my living room anymore. We specialized in cleaning up messy logistics data for companies too stubborn, or too broke, to hire big consulting firms. It paid well. More importantly, it gave me leverage, freedom, independence options. I lived in a condo with big windows that let the city skyline pour in at night like a low-voltage glow. I had furniture that didn't wobble. I could buy groceries without looking at the price per ounce. The ledger in my head, the real one, the one I'd built, was full of green cells now. Paid. Covered. Balanced. But the other ledger, the ghost ledger from my parents' kitchen, was still there. Top of the fridge, dusted by memory. It followed me, even into client meetings and quiet dinners. Whenever my parents called, it became solid again. Dad, I'm telling you, Jason, it's time you stopped acting like you don't owe us. You're over 30. We did our part. Now it's your turn. Mom in the background. We just want to see him appreciate what we gave up. Dad, don't think you can dodge it forever. Every conversation ended the same, them pushing me, deflecting, a sour taste lingering in my mouth like spoiled milk. So one Sunday morning, sitting at my desk with sunlight striping the hardwood floor, I decided, today. I logged into my bank. I pulled up the transfer page. My fingers hovered over the keys. This was years of planning condensed into a single transaction. I had double-checked the number more times than I could count. $201,732. 84, exact. No tip, no rounding, no generosity. I entered their account details. Yes, I had them. Dad had once demanded I send money. To prove good faith. And I'd kept the info. In the memo line, I typed the words I'd been carrying for years. Debt repaid. I stared at it for a long time. My pulse wasn't racing. My chest wasn't tight. I just felt steady, like clicking the last piece of a puzzle into place. Then I hit send. The confirmation screen popped up. Transfer successful. That was it. No fireworks. No choir. Just a clean line. Immediately, I blocked them. Phone numbers, emails, Facebook, even the half-dead family group chat. Gone. Their voices, their sighs, their endless tallies, gone. That evening, my phone buzzed once with a text from Mom before the block kicked in. I saw the preview. We got your. That was all. My brain filled in the rest, but I didn't open it. I never will. The next day, at work, I half expected something, a knock on the door, an angry voicemail somehow slipping through the cracks, even a letter. But the world stayed quiet. My team laughed over lunch about some data glitch, and I laughed with them. For once, I wasn't split between two ledgers. There was only one. Mine. A week later, my sister called from a new number. She was always softer, quieter, caught in the undertow of my parents' constant scorekeeping. She didn't ask me for money. She didn't lecture. She just said, "They're furious. Dad's been pacing with the ledger. He says you humiliated him. Mom says you're cruel." But, she paused, like she was afraid of her own words. "I think what you did was genius." I swallowed hard. It's not about genius. It's about being done. "I know," she said. I'm proud of you." That night, I slept better than I had since I was a kid. No ticking meter in my head. No phantom sighs. No numbers hanging over me like swords. In the quiet, I realized something. I hadn't bought freedom with that transfer. I'd simply stopped renting guilt from people who never knew how to love without charging interest. The money didn't matter. The silence did. And for the first time, it was mine. The first real wave of aftermath came 2 weeks later. My sister called again, same new number, her voice hushed like she was reporting from behind enemy lines. "They've been showing the transfer slip to anyone who'll look," she said. "Dad keeps waving it like it's proof you finally understood your responsibility. He tells neighbors, see?" I raised him right. "He paid me back every cent." I almost laughed. Of course he would spin it that way. But then she added, "When people ask why you block them, they get cagey. Mom says you're going through a phase. Dad says you'll come crawling back once you realize family is all you've got." I could picture it, him standing there with the ledger, finger stabbing the page, then flipping the transfer slip around like a trophy. In his mind, he'd won. He got the number he'd been demanding for years. What he didn't understand, what he couldn't understand, was that the number wasn't the victory. The silence was. For the first few weeks, I half expected some kind of retaliation. A letter, maybe? A surprise knock at my condo door. Nothing came. The blocks held. Their absence felt strange, like stepping into a room where a machine had been running your whole life and suddenly it's gone. The quiet was so loud it made my ears ring. I filled the silence with ordinary things, cooking meals that didn't have to be the cheapest option, long walks at night when the city lights flickered against the river, meetings with my team where we laughed too hard over nothing. I bought a plant, kept it alive, then bought 2 more. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty about taking up space. Still, pieces of them lingered. When I stood under the shower too long, I caught myself bracing for the knock on the door, the reminder that hot water costs extra. When I bought a new jacket, I felt the phantom voice, remember what we spent on you. But the voices had nowhere to land. I'd already paid them off. The ledger was closed. My sister updated me sporadically. They're furious they can't reach you, she whispered once. Dad's threatened to drive to your place, but Mom's scared of embarrassing herself if you won't open the door. They don't understand why you'd send the money and then vanish. That made me smile. Exactly. That's the part they'll never understand. Because for them, the ledger wasn't about numbers. It was about control. Money was just the language they used to keep me tethered. By settling it in their terms, I cut the rope. One night, after a long client call, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and thought about the irony. They wanted repayment, and I gave it. But in giving it, I proved their entire philosophy hollow. They wanted me to live forever in debt-shaped gratitude. Instead, I turned their debt into an invoice and marked it paid in full. That was the real humiliation for them, not the money, but the fact that I stripped their power down to a number. A number that could be erased with a single transfer. I started to notice changes in myself, small but steady. When colleagues offered to cover lunch, I didn't freeze up. When my girlfriend, yes, I finally let myself have one, said, "Let me get the drinks this time," I didn't hear a trap. I heard kindness. Real, uncomplicated kindness. It felt like unlearning a language. Months passed. My parents' names stopped popping into my head every morning. The space they used to occupy filled with things I chose, new contracts, road trips, books I actually enjoyed instead of textbooks I had to survive. I even took a vacation, the first real one of my life, 3 days in a cabin by a lake, phone off, no ledger on the fridge, no sighs at the sink. My sister told me later. Mom cries sometimes, says you'll regret cutting them off. Dad says you'll come crawling back when you realize you're alone. But I wasn't alone. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who didn't see me as a balance sheet. Colleagues, friends, a partner who laughed with her whole body and never once made me feel like I owed her for it. The debt was gone. The silence stayed. And slowly, I realized something even bigger. I hadn't just settled their ledger. I'd started erasing the one inside myself. Not all at once, but line by line. They didn't give up quietly. Of course they didn't. People like my parents don't know how to live without an audience, without someone to remind, someone to tally, someone to guilt. The first attempt slipped through the cracks about 3 months after the transfer. A handwritten letter, in my father's blocky script, no return address but unmistakably theirs. The envelope had that faint smell of their house, coffee grounds and old carpet. I held it for a full minute before opening, debating whether it was even worth reading. In the end, curiosity won. Inside was 3 pages of what he probably thought was a masterful mix of scolding and sentiment. "You've made a mockery of everything we've sacrificed," it began. "We kept receipts not because we cared about money, but to teach you responsibility. That was the lesson. And instead of honoring us, you tried to humiliate us with some kind of stunt. You think you're free of us because you sent a pile of money? Don't fool yourself. Family isn't a transaction. You'll see that when you're older and alone." Page 2 was a laundry list of expenses he thought I'd forgotten. Doctor's visits he claimed weren't in my calculation, a school trip. We let you skip because you didn't deserve it but still had to pay a deposit. Even the hospital bill for my birth. He'd scribbled in the margin. "Did you account for this?" Page 3 turned syrupy. "We love you. We only wanted you to understand what it means to give. One day you'll realize how much we did for you, and you'll regret this cruelty. It's not too late to come back, apologize, and do right by us. I folded the letter once, dropped it in the shredder, and went back to my spreadsheet for work. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. It was just noise on paper, and I'd already bought silence. After that, my sister started warning me about new tactics. They're trying the extended family now, she said over the phone, her voice low like she was sharing state secrets. Uncle Rick called me last night, said Dad phoned him ranting about how ungrateful you are. They're telling everyone you're mentally unstable. Let them, I said. If people believe them, they weren't on my side anyway. Still, hearing it stung. For years, my parents had controlled the narrative. To the outside world, they were frugal, hard-working, long-suffering parents who raised a difficult son. I'd spent so long bracing against their sighs and smirks that a part of me still feared other people would nod along. But here's the thing, outside their house, most people don't care. My colleagues didn't know or didn't ask. My friends only knew my parents were complicated. My partner, when I told her the broad strokes, blinked and said, "So you settled their fake bill and blocked them?" Honestly, that's kind of brilliant. I'd expected judgment. Instead, I got support. That contrast taught me more than years of therapy could have. Then came the last card they had left, guilt by proxy. One evening, my sister called in tears. They showed up at my apartment. Unannounced. Dad was waving the ledger around like it was holy scripture. He kept saying, "You're next. Don't think you get a free ride." Mom just sat there, crying about how you've abandoned them. I clenched my jaw. "What did you do?" "I told them to leave," she whispered. "And then I locked the door. But I'm scared, Jason. They're going to use me to get to you." That hit me harder than any letter or rumor. My sister had always been quieter, the one who absorbed their moods instead of fighting back. I hated that she was still in their orbit. "Listen," I told her, steady as I could. "You don't owe them either. Not 1 cent. Not one sigh. They'll try to keep you in the ledger, but it's fake. It's not love. It's accounting with a gun to your head. You can walk away too." There was silence on the line, then a shaky laugh. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," I admitted. "But it's possible." After that call, I thought a lot about what repayment had really meant. They wanted me to live in perpetual obligation, to bow every time I ate food or turned on a light. They didn't want a lump sum, they wanted a leash. By giving them exactly what they'd demanded, I'd cut the leash in the cleanest way possible. And that freedom wasn't just mine to keep. My sister could have it too, if she wanted. Over the next months, I focused on building a life outside their gravity. I expanded my firm, traveled more, let myself enjoy things without a meter running in my head. I bought decent wine. I splurged on a chair that didn't hurt my back after 12-hour days. Small luxuries, but each one was a quiet rebellion against the idea that joy had to be rationed or paid back with interest. Sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary day, the weight of it hit me. I'd be walking home with groceries, or laughing with friends over a dumb story, and it would wash over me. I don't owe anyone for this. Not a cent. Not an apology. Not a sigh. That was the real revenge. Not the transfer itself, not the note in the memo line. It was the life after. The quiet, guiltless life where love wasn't measured in receipts. My parents? They can keep their ledger. They can wave it around, shout at relatives, scribble new totals in the margins. It doesn't matter. The book only has power if someone reads it. And I've stopped reading. So when people ask me now what closure feels like, I tell them this: it's not fireworks. It's not a big confrontation. It's not even satisfaction, not in the dramatic sense. It's peace. It's the hum of your own refrigerator in a quiet kitchen. It's walking into your home and knowing every square foot is yours. It's breathing without hearing someone sigh behind you. That's what they lost the day I sent the transfer. Not the money. The audience. And that's what I gained. A life without ledgers. It's been over 2 years since I hit send on that transfer. 2 years of silence. 2 years without phone calls dripping with guilt. 2 years where the only ledger I keep is for my business, and the only sighs I hear are my own when I've worked too long in front of a screen. At first, the quiet felt almost wrong. Like when you leave a city street and step into a library, your ears keep searching for the honks and chatter. I'd come home from work and half expect the phone to light up with my dad's number. Sometimes I even picked it up, thumb hovering over recent calls, only to see nothing but colleagues and friends. That's when it would hit me, they're gone. By my choice. The longer the silence stretched, the more natural it felt. Eventually it stopped being silence. It just became life. My sister still calls sometimes. She hasn't cut them off completely, but she's started pulling away, setting boundaries they hate. She tells me about the guilt trips, the crying fits, the ledger still sitting on top of the fridge. They write in it less now, she said once, almost laughing. Like they don't know who they're keeping score against anymore. That image stuck with me. The ledger shrinking into irrelevance, the pages yellowing with numbers no one would ever repay. A monument to nothing. I told her what I'll tell anyone who asks. I don't regret it. Not a penny. Not a second. People hear the story and ask if I feel guilty for throwing money away or cutting off family. Here's my answer: no. I didn't throw money away. I bought freedom. I didn't cut off family. I cut off creditors who never loved me without a price tag. Love is not a transaction. Parenting is not a loan. You don't hand a baby a receipt and a payment plan. If you do, what you're raising isn't a child. It's a debtor. It took me a long time to understand that. For years I thought maybe they were right, that maybe I did owe them, that maybe gratitude was supposed to feel like servitude. But the truth is simple: the second I transferred that money, I wasn't paying them back. I was proving they'd been wrong all along. I was showing that love with strings is just control dressed up as generosity. Now, when I wake up in the mornings, the first thought in my head is an oh. It's what do I want to do today? That shift sounds small, but it's everything. It's the difference between being a tenant in your own life and being the owner. I've learned to enjoy things without hearing a price tag whispered in the background. I take my partner out to dinner and don't calculate how many hours of work it equals. I buy gifts for my employees on their birthdays because I want to, not because I expect repayment. I spend Sunday mornings in a coffee shop with a book, sunlight on the table, and not once do I hear my father's voice telling me, "Coffee isn't free, you know." The ghosts still show up sometimes. A twinge of guilt when I book a flight. A reflex to say sorry when I take too long in the shower. But now I can stop, breathe, and remind myself that ledger is closed. And that's the closure I never thought I'd get. Not them apologizing, not them understanding. Just me deciding the balance is zero. Some nights I imagine them sitting in their kitchen, ledger open, dad scratching in new numbers just to feel control. Maybe he lists my sister's groceries, or the cost of heating the house. Maybe mom sighs and says, "One day they'll thank us." But the difference is, it doesn't reach me anymore. Their book has no jurisdiction here. If you grew up with parents like mine, you know the weight I'm talking about. That constant feeling of being in arrears, like your existence is a bill you can never pay off. It doesn't matter if the ledger is literal or just spoken, it gets inside you. It shapes every decision, every relationship. But here's what I want to leave you with: there is a way out. It's not easy. It might not look the same for you as it did for me. Maybe your transfer isn't money, it's moving out, changing your number, saying no for the first time and meaning it. Maybe it's therapy, maybe it's distance, maybe it's building a new family from scratch. But the principle is the same: you can close the ledger. For me, closure came in the form of $201,732.84 and 3 words in a memo line. For you, it might come in another shape. The important part is that you decide when the balance is zero, not them. The best revenge I ever got wasn't that transfer. It wasn't blocking their numbers. It was the first night I lay down in my condo, no debt hanging over me, and realized I could take as many breaths as I wanted and no one could charge me for them. So if you're wondering what it feels like this. It feels like cooking a meal and knowing the only thing you owe afterward is doing the dishes. It feels like hugging someone and not worrying what it'll cost you later. It feels like sitting under your own roof and knowing it's not collateral. It feels like finally, being free. And that's all I ever wanted.